For 14 months, a boy nobody defended learned how to move quietly, speak softer, and survive longer than any child should have to. On a gray Thursday afternoon, he limped into a diner with an arm cast that hadn't been changed in months and asked one terrifying-looking biker for permission to sit down. He had one shot, because if he failed, he didn't have a next place to go. But what happened 47 seconds later made a whole room realize they'd been ignoring a nightmare hiding in plain sight. And the part that still gets people? The biker didn't raise his voice. He raised a promise. Before we jump in, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from right now, your couch TV or your phone. Sir, can I sit with you, just until my leg stops shaking? Jacob Jake Morrison said it like a prayer he wasn't sure he deserved to say out loud. His voice didn't crack because he was dramatic. It cracked because he was 9 and running on fumes. The place was called Penny's Harvest Diner, a little off the highway outside Marshfield, Missouri, clean enough to feel safe, busy enough to disappear inside, and loud enough that a kid could ask for help without drawing a spotlight. That was the plan, anyway. Jake's limp was the kind you don't fake. One side of his body moved like it was carrying a secret weight. His right arm sat inside a faded, grimy cast covered in old signatures, names written months ago by kids who thought a cast was something fun, not something that turns into a cage when nobody takes you back to the doctor. His sneakers were split at the toes, held together with strips of duct tape. His hoodie was 2 sizes too big. And his face looked like a kid who'd stopped expecting good news. He stepped in and froze for a half beat, eyes darting, counting exits, counting adults, counting threats. Because the first 10 seconds mattered. If someone recognized him before he found the right table, he'd be hauled back like a runaway dog. 10 seconds. That's all Jake gave himself. 10 seconds to pick the safest stranger in the room. He tried the nearest booth first. 2 men in work shirts, plates of food, laughter loud enough to pretend nothing bad happened in the world. Jake took one careful step closer, opened his mouth, and one of them turned his shoulder like a door shutting. "Not today, kid," the man said without looking him in the eye. Jake nodded like he understood, like rejection was just weather. Second booth, an older woman with a bun and a grandkid across from her, crayons scattered on the table. The child looked up, curious. The grandma saw Jake's cast, saw his limp, and her smile faded into something guarded. "Sweetheart, we're waiting on somebody," she lied quickly, pulling the child's coloring page closer like it needed protecting. Third, 3 church ladies with iced tea and bright smiles that turned hard the second Jake approached. One of them didn't even whisper. "Where are his parents?" she said, like Jake was a nuisance someone forgot to leash. His cheeks heated. His fingers curled tight around the small thing in his pocket. A brass key tag stamped with a room number, heavy and cold, like it didn't belong to a kid at all. He didn't pull it out. Not yet. That key tag was his proof, his panic button, his last card. And he didn't know who earned it. He turned toward the back corner. That's when the room changed, and most people didn't even notice they were the reason. The corner table wasn't a booth. It was a small, square table meant for 2, occupied by one man who looked like trouble in a leather vest. Big shoulders, gray beard trimmed short, tattoos crawling up his arms like old stories nobody asked him to tell. A scar ran along one knuckle, like he'd punched something harder than bone at least once in his life. His name was Marcus Bull Davidson, though the diner didn't know that. They just knew his presence made people choose different seats. Bull wasn't doing anything wrong. He was eating chili and cornbread, sipping coffee, reading a folded local paper like a man trying to be invisible on purpose. But the patch on his vest, Hell's Angels, made polite people forget their manners. Jake didn't walk toward him because he wanted danger. He walked toward him because danger was honest. The other tables had smiled first and then shut him out. Bull looked like he'd never bother smiling for show. Jake stopped beside the table, close enough that Bull could see the grime at the edge of the cast, the faint yellow bruise on Jake's neck, and the way the boy's knee trembled like his body was begging to sit before it gave out. Jake swallowed once, hard. "Sir, can I sit with you? Nobody else will." Bull didn't do that thing adults do, where they pause to measure the social cost of kindness. He didn't scan the diner for witnesses. He didn't look away and pretend he didn't hear. He reached down with his boot and nudged the empty chair out gently, like he was sliding a lifeboat across water. "Sit," he said. Gravel voice, soft delivery. No fear in it. "You're okay right here." Jake's shoulders dropped like someone had cut a rope, but when he tried to lower himself into the chair, his bad hip caught. Pain lightninged through him, and his balance went. His crutch slipped, metal clattered. Heads snapped up like a flock of birds. And in that instant, Jake's eyes went wide with the oldest kind of panic. Because what he didn't know was the sound of that crutch hitting the floor had just bought him attention he couldn't afford. Bull stood so fast the chair legs scraped the tile. He caught the crutch, set it upright, and steadied Jake with one hand at his elbow. Not grabbing, not squeezing, just anchoring him like a wall that doesn't move. "You're good," Bull murmured, low enough only Jake could hear. "Nobody's touching you." Bull sat again, slower this time, and Jake finally eased into the chair like it was made of glass. A waitress in her 60s, name tag said Darla, hovered near the counter pretending to wipe the same spot twice. Her eyes kept flicking to the kid, then to Bull, like she didn't know which part was more dangerous. The biker, or the fact the biker was about to care. Bull lifted 2 fingers, a small signal. "Ma'am," he called, polite as Sunday, "bring him something he can actually eat, not a snack, a meal." Darla approached, cautious but not rude. "What'll you have, honey?" Jake stared at the laminated menu like it was written in a foreign language. Bull didn't look at the menu at all. "Grilled cheese, fries, and a chocolate shake. Fast, please." Darla nodded and disappeared. Jake kept his hands in his lap, shoulders tight, eyes flicking toward the windows like he expected someone to burst in any second. He was counting time again, but this time it was worse, because in Jake's head, he had a deadline. Before 5:30, before his uncle sobered up, before somebody noticed he was gone, before the wrong phone call got made. Bull watched him the way soldiers watch a quiet road, still, alert, reading everything. "Name?" Bull asked. Jake hesitated, then, "Jake. Jacob Morrison." Bull nodded once like he was filing it somewhere permanent. "I'm Bull." Jake's lips parted like he almost asked if that was a joke. He didn't. He looked down instead. Bull's eyes landed on the cast. "How long you been in that thing?" "Long," Jake whispered. "Long like 2 weeks, or long like somebody stopped taking you places?" Jake didn't answer. He didn't have to. And that's when Bull noticed the wrist. Not the bruises first, the grip marks. Fading fingerprints around the left wrist, like someone had held him too hard, and too often. Bull's jaw tightened, just once. The food came fast, like Darla had been waiting for an excuse to do the right thing. Jake stared at the plate like it might vanish if he blinked. "Eat," Bull said simply. "It's not a trick." Jake took one bite, then another. Then the kind of bite you take when you don't know when you'll be allowed to eat again. He wasn't messy. He was fast, controlled. Like survival had taught him how to disappear food without making noise. Bull didn't push yet. He let the kid's hands stop shaking first. When the shake arrived, Jake wrapped both hands around the glass like it was warmth. And then, finally, Jake said the sentence that didn't belong in a diner at all. "I'm not supposed to be here." Bull leaned in slightly. "Where are you supposed to be?" Jake's eyes glistened. He tried to swallow it back. It didn't go. "At home," he said. "With my uncle." Bull didn't react, big, no cursing, no theatrics, just a steady look that said, "Keep going." Jake's voice dropped into a whisper that felt like it had claws in it. "I can't go back. He's trying to make it look like I won't make it." The air around their table felt thicker. A fork paused somewhere behind them. A laugh died mid-breath. People heard "trying" and "won't make it," and suddenly their pancakes didn't taste the same. Bull kept his voice calm. "Tell me why you believe that." Jake reached into his hoodie pocket with his good hand and pulled out the brass motel key tag. The number stamped into it caught the light. "I took this," Jake said, trembling, from his pocket, because he said it on the phone in that room, and I heard it. Bull didn't touch the key tag yet. He just looked at it like it was a bullet on a table. Jake's words started coming faster, like once the door cracked open, the whole truth shoved through. "He broke my hip," Jake blurted. "He pushed me down the basement steps and told the doctor I fell. He locks the pantry. He locks my door from the outside. He took me out of school, said he was homeschooling, but he doesn't teach me. He just leaves me there." Bull's eyes stayed on Jake's face. Not the diner, not the people listening, not the judgment. Only the kid. Jake's lower lip shook. "I heard him say, if I don't make it through the winter, he gets the money." Bull's voice stayed level, but something in it sharpened. "What money?" Jake squeezed the key tag until his knuckles went white. "My parents died," he whispered. "Car wreck last year. There's insurance, trust money. My uncle gets some now, and he controls the rest." Bull nodded once, slow. "And he spent it," Jake added, like he'd learned to recognize adult desperation. "He's always mad about money, always on the phone, and he said if it looks natural, nobody asks questions." Jake's eyes finally met Bull's, and there was a kind of pleading there that didn't ask for pity. It asked for belief. "The police came once," Jake said. He smiled at them. They looked at me like I was lying. "Everybody believes him." Bull exhaled through his nose, careful, controlled, like he was holding a storm behind his ribs. "How long since you ate a full meal?" Bull asked. Jake blinked, ashamed. I don't know, maybe 3 days, 4? "And your room," Bull said. "Is it warm?" Jake shook his head once. "It's the garage. The heater doesn't work." Bull's chair shifted as he stood, slow and deliberate, so Jake wouldn't panic. Jake still panicked. His hand shot out and grabbed Bull's wrist like a lifeline. "Don't leave," Jake whispered, raw. "Please." Bull immediately lowered himself, bending at the knees until he was eye level with the boy. His big hand didn't grab Jake's, it covered it. Steady, gentle, definite. "I'm not leaving," Bull said. "Hear me? Not you. Not today." Jake's breath hitched. Bull's voice turned even quieter, more personal. "You were brave enough to sit at my table. Now I'm going to be brave enough to do what the rest of the world didn't." Bull looked at the key tag again, then at Jake. "You keep eating. You keep breathing. I'm going to make one call." Bull stepped outside into the parking lot where the wind had teeth, pulled out his phone, and scrolled to a contact labeled Stone. Dean Stone Mercer, the Hells Angels chapter president, picked up on the second ring. "Bull," Stone said. No greeting, just presence. "You okay?" Bull's voice was flat with focus. "Got a kid inside. 9 years old. Hurt, hungry, says his guardian is setting him up to die for a payout." A beat of silence. Then Stone. "Where are you?" "Penny's Harvest Diner off the highway." Stone didn't ask for the whole story on the phone. He didn't ask if Bull was sure. He didn't ask if this was their business. He asked the only thing that mattered. "How many minutes do you need?" Bull looked back through the diner window. Jake was still eating, eyes darting, trying to believe. Bull answered, 10. Stone's voice hardened like cooled steel. "You'll have headlights in 5. Bull ended the call and stood there in the wind, jaw set, while the sky dimmed toward evening. And that's when the rumble started. Not loud at first, just a low vibration you feel more than hear. Because what Jake didn't know yet was, the moment Bull made that call, the waiting was over. If you're watching, and you believe kids deserve real protection, subscribe and comment where you're watching from, TV or phone, because stage 3 is where the truth finally stops whispering. The first bike rolled in like a low growl under the diner's neon sign. Then a second. Then a line of headlights that didn't weave or show off, just pulled in smooth and steady, like men who'd practiced arriving without creating chaos. Stone Mercer came in last, not because he was late, but because leaders don't rush the door. He killed the engine, took off his gloves, and scanned the windows once, taking inventory the way you'd scan a room for exits and threats. Inside Penny's Harvest Diner, people started pretending they were suddenly very interested in their coffee. Forks slowed. Conversations lowered, not because the bikers looked angry, because they looked capable. Bull was already waiting near the counter, half-turned so he could see Jake's table and the front door at the same time. The kid sat with his shoulders tucked in, gripping his chocolate shake like it was proof the world could still give him something sweet. Stone stepped in and didn't make a speech. He didn't have to. The patch on his vest said Hells Angels, but his eyes said something else entirely. This is getting handled, and nobody needs to get hurt for it to happen. Bull met him halfway. He's the one, Bull said quietly, chin nodding toward Jake. Name's Jacob Morrison. Says his uncle is Rick Holloway. Stone's face didn't change much, but his gaze sharpened a hair. That the same Holloway who runs his mouth at council meetings? He asked. Bull gave a small, grim nod. The same. Stone didn't walk straight to Jake like he wanted to loom over him. He took a slow angle, stopping short, lowering his body slightly so he wasn't towering. It was a subtle thing, but it mattered to a kid who flinched at fast adult movements. Jake, Stone said, voice calm and grounded. I'm Stone. Bull called me because he trusts me with hard things. Is it okay if I sit for 1 minute? Jake glanced at Bull first. Bull didn't nod dramatically. He just held Jake's eyes and gave the smallest yes, the kind that says, I'm still here. Jake swallowed and nodded once. Stone sat, hands visible, no sudden moves. You did something brave today, he said. Now we're going to do something smart. We're going to keep you safe, and we're going to make it stick. Jake's lips trembled. People always, he started, then stopped like he didn't want to sound like a kid complaining. Stone finished it gently. People always believe the grown-up with the clean shirt, he said. Yeah, I know. And that's when Jake did something that told Stone everything he needed to know. He pulled the brass motel key tag out again and held it out with shaking fingers like it weighed 50 pounds. Stone didn't take it yet. Tell me what that is, he said. Jake's voice went thin. He had it. I heard him in the hallway. He was in a motel. He said names. He said, when I'm gone, it gets split. The word gone landed heavy in that little diner like a dropped plate. A couple at the nearest booth stiffened. A man 2 tables away stared down at his napkin like it suddenly had scripture on it. Stone finally took the key tag, careful, like evidence, like a symbol, like a kid's trust being handed over. He turned it over in his fingers. The stamp read, Larkspur Motor Lodge, Room 12. What he didn't know was, Bull murmured under his breath, more to Stone than to Jake, we've been hearing Larkspur come up lately. Stone didn't react big, but his eyes slid to Bull. Gambling? He asked. Bull's jaw tightened. And a woman, and debt. Stone nodded slowly. Okay, he said, like he'd just placed a chess piece. We're not playing hero, we're playing proof. He stood and motioned, small and tight, to 2 men who'd entered behind him. One was broad-shouldered, with kind eyes, and a medical bag slung over his shoulder like a habit. The other looked like someone who'd worn a badge for a long time and missed it for exactly 0 minutes. Doc, Stone said. Mason. Doc gave Jake a soft smile. Hey, buddy, he said. I'm not here to poke you. I'm here to make sure you don't get ignored again. Mason's voice was steady, professional. Jake, I'm going to ask you questions the way a good investigator should have asked you the first time, he said. You can say, I don't know. You can say, stop. You're in charge of your words. Jake blinked hard, like he'd never heard an adult say that to him. Stone looked at Bull. Where are we on time? He asked. Bull checked his phone, about 18, and Stone's gaze flicked to the window, the parking lot, the highway beyond it. We've got a narrow window, he said. If Holloway realizes he can't control the narrative, he'll sprint to the nearest authority figure and paint the kid as unstable. We need to be first with facts. Then he leaned down toward Bull and said the sentence that changed how this day would end. I want law enforcement arriving to us, Stone said, not us chasing them. Bull nodded. Already called the sheriff's non-emergency, he said. Dispatch set of units in the area. Stone's mouth pressed into a line. "Not good enough," he said quietly. "Make it unavoidable." Mason took out his phone and stepped aside. "I'm calling the state hotline and the county prosecutor's office," he said. "And I'm doing it on speaker." Doc crouched beside Jake's chair. "Can I look at your arm?" he asked gently. "Just look." Jake flinched, then glanced at Bull again. Bull kept his voice low. "He's safe," Bull said. "He's checking. Not hurting." Good Jake nodded. Doc examined the cast edges without touching skin too hard. His expression stayed calm, but his eyes sharpened when he saw irritation and a faint, angry redness near the seam. "This cast should have been changed," Doc said softly. "A while ago." Jake's throat bobbed. "He said it costs money," he whispered. Doc nodded like he'd heard that line 100 times from kids who didn't know adults were lying. "You did nothing wrong," he said. Darla, the waitress, hovered again, wringing her hands in the way older women do when their heart wants to help, but their life has taught them to be careful. Stone turned toward her, voice respectful. "Ma'am," he said. "What's your name?" "Darla," she answered, cautious. "Darla," Stone said, "we're going to need the diner's security footage from today, and we're going to need you to tell an officer what you saw when this boy walked in." Darla's eyes widened. I don't want trouble," she whispered. Stone nodded once. "Neither do we," he said. "We want safety. Trouble is already here. We're just turning the lights on." Darla looked at Jake. Saw the bruising, saw the hunger, saw the way his shoulders stayed braced like he expected pain. Her chin lifted a fraction. "Manager's in the back," she said. "I'll get him." Mason's call clicked on speaker. "Missouri Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline," a voice answered. Mason gave his name and his credentials without bragging. "I'm reporting imminent danger," he said. 9-year-old male, Jacob Morrison, suspected severe neglect and physical abuse. Guardian is Richard Holloway, 47. There is an alleged financial motive involving life insurance and an additional accidental death policy. Jake's eyes went wide at the words. Imminent danger. He looked like he expected adults to laugh or dismiss it. Instead, the woman on the hotline asked, "Is the child with you right now?" Mason answered, "Yes." "Is the alleged abuser aware of the child's location?" "Not yet," Mason said. "But he will be." And that's when Stone glanced toward the window again, because he didn't like the word yet. Bull followed his eyes. A clean, black Ford F-150 rolled into the lot and stopped for half a beat like the driver was checking for something. Then it pulled forward, slow, confident, like it owned the place. Bull's voice went quiet, in a way that carried threat without saying a threatening word. "That's him," Bull said. Jake saw the truck through the window and went pale so fast it was like someone drained the color from his skin. His hands shot under the table like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "He found me," Jake breathed. "He found me." Stone didn't move fast. He moved certain. "Bull," Stone said, "stay with Jake." Then Stone stepped outside with Mason and 2 others, not in a mob, not in a wave, just 4 men walking like they belonged to the law of gravity. Rick Holloway climbed out of the truck wearing pressed jeans and a clean pullover, the kind of outfit that screams, "I'm a respectable man having a frustrating day." He put on his smile before he even shut the door. Stone noticed something else, though. Rick's eyes didn't go to the diner sign first. They went straight to the windows. Straight to the back corner. Straight to Jake. That tiny detail was the first crack in Rick's story. Rick started walking toward the entrance like he intended to stroll in and collect his property. He barely made it 3 steps before Stone shifted 1 foot into his path. Not aggressive, just present. "Afternoon," Stone said pleasantly. "Can I help you?" Rick's smile tightened. "I'm here for my nephew," he said, voice loud enough to sound concerned but not loud enough to look like a scene. "He ran away. He's confused. He has issues." Stone nodded slowly. "What's his name?" Stone asked. Rick blinked, not because he didn't know, because he didn't like being questioned. "Jacob," he said quickly. Jacob Morrison." Stone didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He just held eye contact and said, "You're his legal guardian?" "Of course," Rick snapped, then softened it immediately. "Yes, since his parents passed. Poor kid's troubled." And that's when Mason spoke, still calm, still professional. "Sir, we've made reports," Mason said. "An officer is on the way. You can wait right here." Rick's smile returned, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Reports?" he said, like it was ridiculous. "This is absurd. Look, he tells stories. He lies. He wants attention. He's been through trauma." Stone nodded again, like he agreed with the concept of trauma. "Yeah," Stone said, voice even. "And trauma leaves marks." Rick's gaze flicked down to Stone's vest and back up. His mouth twitched, the first sign that his control wasn't perfect. "You people," Rick said, and then caught himself. "Gentlemen, with all due respect, you're not family. You're not law enforcement. Step aside." Stone didn't step aside. "With all due respect," Stone replied, "you don't get to remove a terrified child from a public place while reports are active." Rick's jaw flexed. "Active reports," he repeated, louder this time. "Who filed—" Then Rick did the one thing he never should have done in public. He pointed at the diner door and said, "He belongs with me." Belongs. Not he's safe with me. Not I'm worried about him. Not I've been looking everywhere. Belongs. Stone kept his face neutral, but his eyes went cold in a way Rick couldn't charm. "A child isn't a belonging," Stone said softly. Rick stepped closer, trying to intimidate with proximity. "Move," he said through his teeth, the smile gone now. And that's when Stone lifted his phone slightly, not like a weapon, like a mirror. "Just so you know," Stone said, "this is recorded." Rick froze for half a second. That half second mattered because it meant Rick understood the game had shifted from control to consequences. He recovered fast. "Fine," he said. "Record all you want. I have nothing to hide." Stone didn't argue. He simply stepped half a foot to the side so Rick couldn't claim he was blocked from leaving while still holding the space between Rick and the entrance. "Wait right there," Stone said. "Deputy will be here any minute." Rick's nostrils flared. Then he tried a new tactic. Sadness. "My nephew is sick," Rick said louder, making sure anyone walking by could hear. "He needs medication. He can't be out in public." Stone glanced toward the truck. "Where's the medication?" he asked. Rick blinked again. "In the house," he said too fast. Stone nodded. "So it's not with the child," he said. "Interesting." Rick's eyes flicked back to the windows again, and Stone caught the desperation underneath. Rick wasn't worried about medication. He was worried about time. Inside, Bull had Jake pressed gently into the corner of the booth so the kid didn't feel exposed. Bull's voice was low, steady. "Listen to me," he said. "You're not going back out that door with him. Not today." Jake's breathing went shallow. "He'll make them believe him," Jake whispered. Bull's eyes stayed locked on Jake's. "Not this time," Bull said. "Because this time, there are too many eyes open." Darla returned with the manager, a stocky man in his 40s who looked like he wanted none of this, until he saw Jake's cast and the way the kid shook. "We have cameras," the manager said quietly. "Footage saves for 30 days. Stone stepped back inside just long enough to call it in, loud enough for the room to hear. "Sir," he told the manager, "please save today's footage and make a copy. Do not let anyone delete it." The manager nodded, swallowing. "Already doing it," he said, and then, finally, a patrol car turned into the lot. Rick's smile came back like a mask snapping into place. "Thank God," he said, loud and relieved. "Officer, my nephew has been taken." The deputy stepped out, looked at the bikers, and his posture tightened automatically. His gaze slid to Stone's vest, then to Rick's clean clothes, then toward the diner. Stone didn't posture. He didn't talk over anyone. He simply said, "Deputy, we have a child in there who has visible injuries and is alleging abuse and a financial motive. Reports are filed. We have a key item that may relate to a motel meeting. We have camera footage. We need a supervisor and a child advocate on scene." Rick opened his hands like he was the victim. "This is insane," he said smoothly. "He makes things up. He's mentally unwell. He needs to come home." The deputy hesitated. Just a flicker. And that's when Mason stepped forward and said, very calmly, "Deputy, if you let that child leave with him without checking the bruising, without a medical evaluation, and without documenting the environment he's describing, you're taking responsibility for the next outcome." The deputy's jaw tightened. "All right," he said. "We're doing this properly." Rick's mask slipped again, just for a blink, because in that blink, Rick realized he wasn't in control anymore. And that's when the diner door opened and the deputy walked in to meet Jake Morrison. 9 years old, limping, hungry, and finally not alone. The deputy didn't start with the uncle's smile. He started with the boy's eyes. Jake sat frozen in that corner booth, like the seat might disappear if he moved. And when the deputy crouched to his level, Jake's whole body flinched on instinct, then tried to pretend it didn't happen. "Jake," the deputy said, steady and plain. "I'm not here to take you anywhere you don't feel safe. I just need to understand what's going on, okay?" Jake's gaze slid to Bull like a reflex. Bull didn't speak over him. He just stayed there, solid as a post, and said one quiet sentence. "Tell the truth, that's all." Jake nodded once, and the deputy saw it, the way a kid nods when he's agreeing to something bigger than a question. Outside, Rick Holloway kept talking like volume could turn a lie into a fact. He kept insisting Jake was confused, that the bikers were influencing him, that he needed to come home. But the deputy had already watched the diner manager pull up camera footage. He'd already seen Jake limp in like he was carrying pain in his bones, and he'd already seen Rick in the parking lot lock onto that back corner table like a hunter finding the only deer worth the bullet. And he'd heard Rick say it, clear enough to make the hairs rise on the back of the deputy's neck. "He belongs with me." The deputy stepped back outside, radioed for a supervisor, and then said the sentence Rick Holloway didn't expect to hear in public. "Sir, you're going to stand right here while we sort this out." Rick's smile twitched. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said, voice smooth. Then you won't mind waiting, the deputy answered. What Rick didn't know was, the moment a supervisor got en route, the situation stopped being a misunderstanding and started being a case. Inside, Doc kept his tone gentle while he looked at Jake's cast and the irritated skin around it. "We're going to get you checked out tonight," he told him. "Not later, not next week. Tonight." Jake's throat worked like he was trying not to cry in front of strangers. Is he gonna be mad?" he whispered. Bull's answer came fast, and it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a fact. "He doesn't get a vote anymore." A social worker arrived within the hour, then another deputy, then a supervisor who walked in with the kind of expression that said she'd seen too many kids get swallowed by paperwork. She sat near Jake, asked permission before she spoke, and listened without interrupting while he told the story in short bursts, because kids don't narrate pain like adults do. They drop the pieces they can carry. The garage room, the locked door from the outside, the pantry padlocks, the cold nights, the homeschooling that was really just isolation. The cast that never got changed, the bruise marks that came and went like weather, and finally, the brass motel key tag. Stone held it out to the supervisor like it was made of glass. "He says he took this from Holloway's pocket," Stone explained. "Room number's on it. He overheard a call in the hallway." The supervisor didn't roll her eyes. She didn't dismiss it as kid imagination. She nodded, wrote it down, and asked Jake, "Do you know the name of the motel?" Jake's voice came out tiny. "Larkspur," he said. "The tag says Larkspur." That little piece of metal changed everything, because it wasn't a feeling. It wasn't a suspicion. It was a thread you could pull. The supervisor turned to the deputy. "I want a welfare check and a scene assessment at the residence tonight," she said. "And I want photographs, proper ones." Rick Holloway heard that through the open door and lost his calm for the first time. "No," he snapped, the mask slipping. "You can't just... That's my house." The deputy stepped closer, not aggressive, just final. "Sir, lower your voice." Rick tried to recover. "He's unstable," he insisted, turning toward the supervisor like he could charm her too. "He lies. He wants attention. The supervisor didn't look impressed. "Then we'll find out," she said. An ambulance arrived, more routine than dramatic, and Jake's whole body tensed again like sirens meant punishment. Doc leaned in and spoke right into Jake's spoor. "This ride is for you," Doc said. "Not because you did something wrong, because you deserve medical care like any other kid." Jake stared at him like that idea was new. Bull walked with Jake to the ambulance doors, not touching him unless Jake reached first. When Jake climbed in, he hesitated, then looked back down at Bull with wet eyes. "Are you gonna disappear?" Jake asked, like he'd learned adults vanish the moment a form gets signed. Bull shook his head once. "Not tonight," he promised. "I'll be right behind you." And he was. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights made everything feel too bright, too exposed. Nurses asked questions. A doctor examined Jake's hip and arm, ordered x-rays, and didn't talk down to him. They cut the old cast off carefully, and Jake winced through it, teeth clenched, trying to be brave in the way only kids who've had to be brave know how. When the cast finally came off, Jake stared at his arm like he couldn't believe his own skin had been trapped for so long. Doc sat beside him, while the nurse cleaned the irritation and said quietly, "You did the right thing by leaving." Jake's voice broke. "I didn't know where to go," he admitted. Doc nodded. "You found a table." Back at the diner, the manager burned a copy of the security footage for law enforcement. Mason provided his report to the supervisor. The key tag was logged as evidence, and 2 deputies drove to 412 Oakwood Lane with a supervisor and a child protective investigator. They didn't need bikers to kick in doors. They needed a warrant, a camera, and someone willing to actually look. The investigator photographed the garage room. The lack of heat. The lock on the outside of the door. The thin blanket folded like it was rationed. The pantry with padlocks. The "Bless this home" sign on the porch that suddenly felt like a joke told by a cruel man. And inside a desk drawer, they found paperwork that made the room go quiet. A life insurance trust statement with Jake's name, a guardian control document, and an accidental death policy form. Recent. The kind of form that doesn't prove intent by itself, but doesn't belong in a loving home either. What happened next wasn't loud. It was procedural. Rick Holloway was detained that night. Not because bikers demanded it, because a supervisor saw enough to protect a child immediately and a deputy documented enough to justify it. Jake wasn't told every legal detail. He didn't need the adult words for it. He just needed the one outcome that mattered. He didn't go back. Emergency protective custody placed him in a safe, temporary setting while the paperwork moved. A judge signed a no-contact order within days. A child advocate was assigned. A caseworker scheduled follow-up appointments the way a normal parent would have. Orthopedic consult, physical therapy referral, nutrition evaluation, counseling intake. And because Jake's limp wasn't just pain, it was months of untreated injury, his recovery became a plan, not a hope. Bull didn't pretend he could fix a kid with one brave moment. He showed up for the unglamorous parts. He drove behind the caseworker to the hospital follow-ups. He sat in waiting rooms without making it about himself. He learned the difference between a guardian and a foster placement, learned what training was required, learned what a background check meant, and didn't complain once because he understood something most adults forget. Kids don't need speeches. They need consistency. Stone and the Hells Angels didn't take over. They did what steady men do when they want real change. They supported the system the right way and refused to let it drift into neglect again. They helped Jake get a winter coat that fit. They bought sneakers that didn't need duct tape. They made sure the caseworker had what she needed. Rides, witness statements, the diner footage, the motel thread that investigators followed. Because that brass key tag didn't just prove a motel existed, it proved Jake wasn't imagining things. And when investigators pulled motel records and verified Rick's presence at the Larkspur Motor Lodge, it didn't solve the whole case like a movie. It did something more important. It gave professionals leverage. Weeks later, Jake stood in a school hallway again with a new backpack and a limp that was still there, but lighter, like hope had taken some weight off it. He still startled when doors shut too fast. He still slept with a light on. He still ate, like tomorrow wasn't guaranteed sometimes. Healing doesn't erase overnight. It rebuilds. One afternoon, after a physical therapy session, Jake sat on a bench outside the clinic with Bull beside him and asked a question he'd probably been carrying since the diner. "Why did you let me sit?" he asked. Bull looked at him for a long second, then shrugged like the answer should be obvious. "Because you asked," he said. Jake frowned. "Nobody else did?" Bull's voice went softer. "Yeah," he said. "That's the part we gotta fix." Because the real villain in Jake's story wasn't only one man with a clean shirt and a rotten plan. It was every adult who saw a child limping past them and decided it was safer to look away. It was every moment someone chose comfort over curiosity. Every time someone said, "Not my business," and let a kid carry the cost. Jake didn't need 100 people to be brave. He needed one table that said yes. And if you're listening right now, here's the truth that lands hard. You don't have to be a biker to be that table. You don't have to be big. You don't have to be tough. You just have to be the person who doesn't turn away when a kid is quietly asking for help. If this story hit you, subscribe for more gentle biker stories. Comment where you're watching from, TV or phone, and share this with someone who feels invisible. Because sometimes the smallest question changes everything.